All right, so now we're going to draw this replication fork with all the enzymes. And so what was the first enzyme that unwound things? Okay, yeah, so this is helicase. So unwinds the DNA by breaking what bonds? The hydrogen bonds between the bases. Nitrogenous bases. Good. Okay. So when it does that, however, those forces of attraction still exist, and so these nucleotides will want to rebind after they've been separated. So we have to have something to prevent that. And what we have are these proteins. Called SSB proteins. Close. A single strand binding proteins. So they prevent reforming of the hydrogen bonds. All right, and so do you remember when we had these strings and we were making those mitosis models with gummy worms? Uh-huh. Did anyone try and take the string and pull it apart? Yes. Okay, what happened when you tried to do that? Yeah, it got stuck, right? So what happens is when you unwind something, it causes upstream for it to what's called supercoil. So if you're unwinding this double helix, you will cause tension on the upper end. So we have another enzyme upstream from it called topoisomerase.
What is it called?
Topoisomerase. And it prevents that supercoiling from occurring. And it does that by cutting it and then reforming it so that it can unwind and then reform there.
So that's preventing our DNA from becoming a slinky.
Yeah, a messed up slinky.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so the same thing occurs if you have a slinky and you try and unwind it. It gets all bunched up upstream. Yeah, kind of. All right. So now that we have it open, now we can go in and start adding nucleotides. Okay, but in order to do that, DNA polymerase can't do it on its own. It needs a primer. Which is added by an enzyme called primase. Okay, and I've given you an orientation for these two strands, right? I've got 3' and 5', 5' and 3'. They're an anti-parallel orientation. So the next thing is, once you have your primers there, then you have an enzyme, which this is the enzyme that does most of the work. DNA polymerase 3. But it can only add, again, to the 3' end. So when looking at this RNA primer up here, how can you determine which end it's going to add to? How can you determine which direction it's going to go? What's that? Well, the RNA primers will be on both sides, but which side of the RNA primer is it going to add DNA nucleotides? The 3 prime. So which side is the 3 prime side? Okay, how do you know that?
Because that was last time.
All right, so here's the DNA, 3 prime,
It's right up there.
5 prime.
It's up there on the board.
What's up there on the board?
3 prime. There's 3 prime just left.
Oh, I know, but that's the DNA strand. It's adding a new strand, right? So this RNA primer is opposite. Right? So this is the 3 prime end, and this is the 5 prime end. Because they're anti-parallel, just like the other ones.
Right, okay.
So which end is the DNA polymerase going to add to? Right, so then it'll attach here. And it'll start adding nucleotides here. Where'd my purple go? And continue in this direction. All right, what's the problem with that? This is opening in the opposite direction, going to the left. So it's going in the wrong direction. And so it has to have these primers continually inserted, and it'll leapfrog back to put in the DNA. So this is called, then, the lagging strand.
So it always starts at the RNA primers and then just floats back and starts another one.
Right. So as this opens up more, you're going to have another primer in there so it can go in and do it. But on the other end, so if we have this primer here, on what end is the DNA polymerase going to add on this side, and in what direction? Everything you own. All right, so let's just do the same thing, just to be thorough. This is the 5 prime end, this is the 3 prime end. So that means this is the 5 prime end, and that's the 3 prime end. So DNA polymerase is going to add on this end. Oops. And it's going to continue in this direction. Which is great. Why?
Because it can just go straight.
Right, because it's opening up in that direction, so it can just keep on going. So we call this then, oops, the leading strand. So the lagging strand is always trying to catch up to the leading strand, which is going continuously. So we call these little fragments then. So if I put another fragment over here, they're named after the person who discovered them. Okazaki fragments, okay? And you're going to have lots of them on the lagging strand. You shouldn't have any on the leading strand. All right, but eventually, so I'm going to have to draw a longer strand here. So eventually, though, these primers need to be pulled out because what are they made of? RNA, right? And we want DNA. So you'll have a DNA chunk over here, and then another DNA chunk over here, and then where the RNA primer has been pulled out, you need to have another enzyme. So this is DNA polymerase 1. And it adds nucleotides where the primers have been removed.
So that kind of fills in what polymerase didn't do.
Right. Because DNA polymerase needs that primer to get started. Now we have to go take out those primers and fill them back in with DNA. And then the last little thing is DNA ligase needs to go in and make that last little phosphodiester bond between those fragments. Yes. And then you have a complete, well, those are all the players at the replication fork, at least for the detail that we're going to go into it. Yes?
Is there any reason why DNA polymerase 1 doesn't just do the whole job himself?
Yeah, DNA polymerase 3 is faster and more efficient and makes less mistakes.
Okay. But
So we're going to use it as much as possible. But yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, or why don't we just make RNA copies? And then we wouldn't have to worry about DNA at all. Why don't we just make, it works, right? And that's how evolution works, is if it works, then it will continue. Right.
Okay.
If something better evolves and replaces it, then it will, but it just needs to function.
This is another weird question that probably has the same